Another very cool new tool in View 6 is the ventilator, which acts sort of as a little fan. And what it does is it'll allow us to do some extra wind changes outside of the global wind, and besides also the top view wind editing for specific objects. It works with ecosystems, and it's mostly for plants, but it also works with ecosystems, painted ecosystems, all those instances. So it's really, really cool. So let's just go ahead and we're going to load up just a regular plant. Let's just load up a plum tree as an actual object and not so much as an ecosystem. But let's just take a look and see how this ventilator actually affects this object. So let's go over to the left where we can see our ventilator, which is just underneath our light panel. And we can add two different types of directional ventilators. If I hold down our button, we'll see that we have a directional ventilator and an Omni ventilator. The Omni ventilator will essentially blow wind in every direction. A directional ventilator goes one specific direction. And I'm just going to do the directional, and we can see it loads up and kind of looks just like a spotlight. But we can use this and actually do some really neat stuff. I'm going to stick some rotation on here, go back to our movement, and just kind of position this. And we can see that our tree is being affected by this ventilator. And if we just leave it here and did an animation, we'd see that there's a nice continuous flow of wind, and we can also go up and adjust the different properties of this wind. So let's take a look up top, and we can see that we can adjust from a directed ventilator to an Omni ventilator if we want to. We can also adjust the intensity. So as I adjust the intensity right now of the directed ventilator, you can see it makes our kind of our cone a little bit longer. And as we position it closer and closer, you can see we get some really drastic looking changes, and the wind's really tearing apart that tree and really moving it around in all different directions. We can also adjust the profile of our wind, so we can adjust a filter for it, which is really neat. We can also adjust the spread, so how largely of an area it affects, and then of course the fall off distance. Now if we're working with an ecosystem, we have this little button down in the lower right that says influence ecosystems. So all we gotta do is check that on, and then it'll work for an ecosystem. Really, really neat. Let's go ahead and switch this to the Omni, and we can see that we lose some of our options because of course we don't need to adjust our cone angle anymore, or our spread. So now we can use an Omni, which ends up just throwing wind off in every single direction, and will affect objects a little bit differently. But you just have more different types of controls with different types of ventilators, so it really depends on what, of course, you need to be using the ventilator for. But we can create some really, really neat hurricane-forced wind type stuff. We can do a lot more randomization for the wind, and it just gives us a lot more options with editing. And like I said, it edits, and it'll work with ecosystems and painted ecosystems, regular ecosystems. There's a lot we can do with it. If I increase our intensity a little bit more too, you'll see that the lines grow on our ventilator, so we can see exactly how much area it's influencing. Very cool. And we can also adjust the cutoff on this as well. So exactly when that wind's going to cut off. And once we put that actually directly on the tree, we get some really neat looking effects as well, where it's really blown to the ground, and there's just a lot we can do with it. So play around with it. Pull up multiple types of trees at a time, do an ecosystem, give it a good render, and really see the power that we have with these new ventilators, because it's really, really neat being able to manipulate these instances within View 6.